One shot in the dark, one witness. A dog that would never forget the killer's face. They thought the dog could testify, but revenge doesn't need words, only teeth and memory. The town of Silver Creek thrived on silver and sin in 1880. Saloons lined Main Street, doing business day and night, constantly. The Golden Rose Saloon was the finest establishment in town. Clara owned it and ran it with an iron fist. She was fair but firm with everyone who entered. Her business prospered, while others struggled around her constantly. Clara had a black Labrador mix named Shadow following her everywhere. The dog was her constant companion for 5 years now. Shadow was intelligent and protective of Clara without being aggressive. He sat quietly in the saloon corner, watching everything carefully. Nothing escaped Shadow's attention in that busy room ever. Tonight started like any other Friday night in Silver Creek. Miners drank away their wages at the bar loudly. Card games ran at 3 tables with money changing hands. Shadow lay in his usual corner, observing the crowd silently.
Deputy Marshal Frank entered the Golden Rose around 8 o'clock. He made his nightly rounds, checking on the town's businesses. "Evening, Clara," Frank said while approaching the bar politely. Clara smiled and poured him coffee without being asked first. "Quiet night so far," she replied while sliding the cup. Frank nodded while scanning the room with practiced eyes carefully. His gaze stopped on a well-dressed gambler at the back. Victor. The man had arrived in Silver Creek 2 weeks ago. He won consistently at cards. Too consistently, some said quietly. Frank suspected cheating, but had no proof to act on. "That gambler giving you any trouble?" Frank asked Clara quietly. Clara glanced at Victor, dealing cards smoothly to 3 minors. "His money's good," she said, "but watch him anyway." Shadow's ears perked up at Victor's name, mentioned between them. The dog's eyes fixed on the gambler with unusual intensity. The evening wore on without incident happening in the saloon. Miners lost money. Gamblers won it. Whiskey flowed. By midnight, the crowd had thinned considerably as usual. Victor remained at his table, counting his winnings carefully. Shadow watched him still from the corner without moving much. Clara began closing up, collecting glasses and wiping tables down. "I'm heading out," Frank said after finishing his rounds completely. "Lock up tight, Clara." Clara nodded while Frank exited into the dark street outside. Victor stood up suddenly and approached Clara at the bar. "I'd like to discuss a business proposition," he said smoothly. Clara looked at him with suspicion showing in her eyes. "The bar's closed," she replied firmly. "Come back tomorrow morning." Victor's smile didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes at all. "This can't wait," he insisted, while moving closer to her. Shadow stood up in his corner, a low growl rumbling. Clara stepped back from Victor's advancing presence immediately and firmly. "I said the bar's closed," she repeated more forcefully. "Leave now." Victor's hand moved toward his vest pocket, smoothly and quickly. Clara saw the gun barrel emerge before she could react. The shot exploded in the quiet saloon like thunder crashing. Clara fell behind the bar, clutching her chest silently. Shadow barked furiously and charged at Victor from his corner. But Victor was all running toward the back door. He kicked it open and disappeared into the alley darkness. Shadow reached Clara's side instantly, checking on her desperately. Blood spread across her dress rapidly and unstoppably. Clara's eyes found Shadow's one last time with recognition. "Shadow," she whispered weakly. "Get him." Her hand fell limp. Shadow howled into the empty saloon with grief and rage. Then he ran after Victor through the open back door.
Shadow burst into the dark alley behind the saloon immediately. Victor's footsteps echoed between buildings ahead, somewhere in darkness. Shadow's nose caught the scent instantly. Gunpowder, whiskey, fear. The dog ran silently through the shadows, hunting his prey. Victor turned left at the end of the alley, disappearing. Shadow followed without hesitation or doubt in his purpose now. The chase led through back alleys and side streets. Victor was fast, but Shadow was faster and relentless. Victor ducked into a stable, trying to lose his pursuer. Shadow entered seconds later, eyes adjusting to deeper darkness inside. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls, sensing danger present. Victor hid in the shadows, breathing hard from running. Shadow's growl filled the stable, warning Victor he was found. Victor emerged with his gun raised at the dog. "Stay back!" he shouted desperately.
Shadow didn't hesitate or fear the gun aimed at him. He lunged forward in protective attack, instinct driving him. Victor fired. The bullet missed. Shadow's weight hit Victor's chest, knocking him backward hard. The gun flew from Victor's hand, clattering on the floor. Shadow pinned Victor down with teeth bared at his throat. But Shadow didn't bite or attack further than that. He held Victor there, growling, waiting for someone to arrive. Victor struggled, but Shadow's weight and strength kept him pinned. "Get off me!" Victor screamed into the dark stable. Shadow's growl intensified as a warning to stay still. Minutes passed. Finally, footsteps approached the stable from outside, quickly. "Who's in there?" Frank's voice called out with authority. Shadow barked once, sharply, in response to the familiar voice. Frank entered with his gun drawn and lantern raised high.
The lantern light revealed the scene to Frank's shocked eyes. Victor, pinned beneath Shadow on the stable floor helplessly. The gun lying several feet away from Victor's reach. "Shadow?" Frank said with confusion at the unexpected sight. "What's going on here?" Shadow barked again, but didn't release Victor from his hold. Frank noticed blood on Victor's vest then, fresh and red. "Victor, is that blood?" Frank asked while approaching cautiously now. Victor tried to push Shadow off desperately without success. "This crazy dog attacked me," he lied frantically. But Shadow's position told a different story to Frank entirely. The dog was holding Victor, not attacking him brutally. "Shadow belongs to Clara," Frank said slowly with realization dawning. "Where's Clara?" Shadow whined and looked back toward the saloon direction. Frank's face went pale, understanding the implication of that sound. Frank ran to the Golden Rose, with Shadow following behind. Victor was left tied in the stable temporarily for now. They burst through the saloon's front door together urgently. "Clara!" Frank shouted into the dim interior space. No answer came back to them at all. Frank moved behind the bar and stopped cold completely. Clara lay on the floor in a pool of blood, dead. Frank knelt beside her, checking for pulse, already knowing. Nothing. His jaw clenched with anger and grief both. Shadow approached Clara's body and lay down beside her. The dog's head rested on her still hand gently. Frank stood up slowly, with determination replacing grief on his face. "Victor did this," Frank said to Shadow quietly. Shadow's eyes met Frank's with shared understanding between them. "You saw it happen, didn't you, boy?" Shadow's tail thumped once on the floor in confirmation. Frank returned to the stable with 2 townsmen helping him. They dragged Victor to the jail cell roughly, without gentleness. "I didn't kill anyone," Victor protested loudly and desperately. Frank locked the cell door with a loud clang echoing. "Clara's dead," Frank said coldly and without emotion showing. "Shot in her own saloon tonight." Victor's face went pale at those words spoken so flatly. I was at my hotel," he stammered weakly. "You can ask anyone there." Frank leaned against the cell bars, staring at Victor. "Shadow says different," he stated simply and directly. Victor laughed nervously at that absurd statement made to him. "A dog can't testify," he said with false confidence returning. "You got nothing on me, deputy." Frank smiled without humor in it at all whatsoever. "Maybe not yet," he agreed, "but I will." But what Frank didn't know yet was this truth. Shadow had memorized every detail of Victor that night. The scent, the face, the voice, the sound of his footsteps. Dogs never forget, especially not a murder they witnessed. And Shadow had a plan forming in his intelligent mind. He would hunt Victor everywhere he went in town. He would find the evidence Frank needed for conviction. Because Shadow understood something Victor didn't realize at all. A dog couldn't testify in court with words spoken aloud. But a dog could lead investigators to hidden evidence, could track every place Victor had been before the murder, could find the proof that would hang Victor legally. The question wasn't whether Shadow would catch Victor anymore. The question was how long Victor could hide his guilt. From a dog that never forgot. From a dog that never stopped hunting. From a dog seeking justice for his murdered friend. The next morning, Shadow refused to leave the jail building. He sat outside Victor's cell, watching the prisoner with unwavering attention. Victor shifted uncomfortably under the dog's constant, intense stare. "Get that mutt out of here!" Victor demanded nervously. Frank ignored him completely while reviewing his investigation notes. Clara's murder weapon was Victor's gun found in the stable, but Victor claimed self-defense against Shadow's supposed unprovoked attack yesterday. Without witnesses, it was Victor's word against Frank's suspicions. The circuit judge arrived in 2 days for the trial. Frank needed more evidence before then, or Victor walked. Shadow suddenly stood up and walked to the jail door. He looked back at Frank and barked once sharply. "What is it, boy?" Frank asked while standing up. Shadow scratched at the door insistently and repeatedly now. Frank opened it, and Shadow ran out immediately. "Shadow, wait!" Frank called out after him. Frank followed Shadow through the streets of Silver Creek quickly. The dog moved with clear purpose and direction in his path. Shadow led Frank to the Golden Rose Saloon first, naturally, but he didn't stop there at the familiar place. He continued past it to the alley behind where Victor fled. Shadow sniffed the ground, carefully tracking an invisible trail only he could detect. Frank watched with growing interest and understanding of Shadow's mission. The dog was retracing Victor's movements from last night precisely. Shadow led Frank through the exact route Victor had taken, through alleys, between buildings, to the stable where Shadow caught him. But then Shadow continued past the stable to somewhere new. Frank followed close behind, watching Shadow work with professional precision. The dog stopped at a boarding house 3 blocks away. He sat at the front steps and barked at Frank. "Victor stayed here?" Frank asked Shadow while looking up. Shadow barked once in confirmation of Frank's correct guess. Frank entered the boarding house with Shadow beside him now. The landlady looked up from her knitting with surprise. "Deputy," she greeted nervously, "What brings you here?" Frank showed his badge and asked about Victor's room. The landlady hesitated, but Shadow growled low at her delay. "Room 5, upstairs," she said quickly while pointing up. Frank climbed the stairs, with Shadow leading the way forward. Victor's room door was locked, but Frank had authority. He kicked it open with one solid boot strike. The room was neat, almost too neat for a gambler. Frank searched methodically through Victor's belongings scattered around carefully. Shadow went directly to the wardrobe in the corner. He pawed at it and whined urgently at Frank. "What'd you find, boy?" Frank asked while opening the wardrobe. Inside the wardrobe, Frank found a leather satchel hidden. He pulled it out and opened it on the bed. His eyes widened at the contents revealed before him. Marked cards, loaded dice, a small Derringer pistol hidden, and most importantly, a ledger book with names and amounts. Frank flipped through the pages, reading quickly with growing understanding. Victor had been cheating at cards for months across territories. He owed money to dangerous people in multiple towns. Clara's name appeared in the ledger on the last page. Business proposition was written beside it with a large sum. Frank understood immediately what happened that fatal night clearly. Victor had tried to extort money from Clara for silence. She refused. He killed her. Shadow sat beside Frank, looking at the ledger book intently. "This is it," Frank said to Shadow with satisfaction. "This proves motive and premeditation for murder." Shadow's tail wagged once, acknowledging Frank's words spoken to him. Frank returned to the jail with the evidence in Shadow. Victor saw the ledger and his face went white. "Where'd you get that?" he demanded with panic rising. "That's private property." Frank placed the ledger on his desk with satisfaction. "Shadow found it," he said simply while looking at Victor. "He led me right to your room and the wardrobe." Victor's confidence crumbled visibly before their eyes watching him. "That dog can't. He's just a dog," Victor stammered. Frank leaned forward against the cell bars looking at Victor. "That dog watched you kill Clara," Frank stated coldly. "He chased you through alleys and pinned you down, and now he's found evidence that'll hang you proper." Victor grabbed the bars desperately with both trembling hands. "I want a lawyer," he said weakly now. Frank smiled without warmth at all in it whatsoever. "You'll get one," he promised Victor. "Won't help you none." Over the next 2 days, Shadow became a town hero. Word spread about how he'd tracked Clara's killer down. People brought him food and treats wherever he went now. But Shadow accepted nothing from anyone except Frank alone. The dog stayed at Frank's side constantly now, his new partner. Frank didn't mind the company at all during patrol rounds. Shadow's presence was comforting after Clara's death had shaken him. The circuit judge arrived on schedule as expected for trial. The courtroom filled with townspeople eager to see justice. Victor sat at the defendant's table looking defeated already. His lawyer argued the evidence was circumstantial at best. But Frank presented the ledger, the marked cards found. Witnesses testified about Victor's cheating at cards over weeks. The motive was clear and proven to everyone present. The prosecutor called Frank to testify about the arrest. "Deputy, how did you locate the evidence?" the prosecutor asked. Frank looked at Shadow sitting beside the witness stand. "Shadow led me to it," Frank testified honestly and clearly. "The dog tracked Victor's movements and found his room." Victor's lawyer jumped up, objecting loudly to the statement. "Your Honor, a dog cannot be a reliable investigator." The judge looked at Shadow sitting calmly and attentively listening. "The dog found physical evidence," the judge ruled firmly. "The evidence speaks for itself, regardless of how it was found." The jury nodded in agreement with the judge's wise ruling. Shadow's tail wagged slightly at the judge's words, supporting him. Victor slumped in his chair, knowing he was finished now. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable against him completely. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning. "Guilty of murder in the first degree," the foreman announced. Victor showed no emotion at the verdict read aloud. The judge sentenced him to hang in 2 weeks. Victor was led away to his cell in chains. Shadow watched him go without barking or growling now. Justice had been served. Clara could rest peacefully. Frank knelt beside Shadow outside the courtroom after the trial. "You did it, boy," he said while scratching Shadow's ears. "You got justice for Clara." Shadow looked up at Frank with those intelligent eyes. The dog had done what he set out to do. He had hunted the killer relentlessly without stopping once. He had found the evidence needed for conviction successfully. He had testified in the only way a dog could, through actions, not words. 2 weeks passed quickly in Silver Creek after the trial. Victor sat in his cell awaiting the hangman's noose. Shadow visited the jail every day without fail or exception. He sat outside Victor's cell, staring at the condemned man. Victor couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly at night. The dog's constant presence haunted him worse than any nightmare. "Why won't you leave me alone?" Victor shouted one night. Shadow just watched silently with those knowing, dark eyes. Frank came by daily, checking on his prisoner as required. "Shadow's got unfinished business with you," Frank observed one afternoon. Victor pressed against the far wall of his cell. "I'm going to hang," he said desperately. "Isn't that enough punishment?" Shadow's low growl answered that question with a clear no. The dog would watch Victor until the very end came. That was Shadow's justice. That was Shadow's promise to Clara kept. The night before the execution, Shadow did something unexpected. He entered Victor's cell when Frank opened it for dinner. The dog walked slowly toward Victor, who pressed back fearfully. But Shadow didn't attack or threaten him at all. He just sat down and stared at Victor intently. "What does he want?" Victor asked Frank desperately. Frank leaned against the bars, watching this strange confrontation. "Maybe he wants you to confess," Frank suggested quietly. Victor looked at Shadow's unwavering eyes, staring at him. Something broke inside Victor at that moment of realization. "I did it," Victor said suddenly, with his voice cracking. "I killed her. Clara wouldn't pay me to stay quiet, so I shot her." Frank pulled out his notebook to record the confession. "Why'd you need the money?" he asked calmly. Victor's shoulders slumped with defeat showing completely now. "Gambling debts. Dangerous people wanted me dead." Shadow's tail moved slightly at Victor's honest confession finally. The dog stood up and walked out of the cell. His work was truly finished now, at last. The day of execution arrived under gray clouds overhead. The entire town gathered in the square to witness. The gallows stood ready, with rope swaying in wind. Victor was led out in chains, looking broken already. His eyes searched the crowd and found Shadow immediately. The dog sat in the front row beside Frank, watching, always watching him. Victor climbed the 13 steps to the platform slowly. The preacher said final prayers over the condemned man. "Any last words?" the hangman asked Victor directly. Victor looked at Shadow one final time below him. "That dog," Victor said with his voice shaking badly, "that dog never stopped hunting me from the first moment. He got his justice." The crowd murmured at those strange final words spoken. The hangman placed the hood over Victor's head. The trapdoor opened with a loud crack. Victor fell. Justice was served completely and finally. After Victor's execution, Frank officially adopted Shadow as his partner. The dog wore a small badge on a leather collar. Deputy Shadow, people called him with affection and respect. Together, Frank and Shadow kept peace in Silver Creek. Shadow's reputation spread across the territory quickly and widely. Criminals feared the black dog who never forgot a face, who could track anyone, anywhere, through any conditions presented, who had brought a murderer to justice through pure determination. One evening, Frank and Shadow visited Clara's grave together. A simple marker stood on the hill overlooking town. Fresh flowers lay at the base from grateful townspeople. "We got him," Frank said quietly to the stone marker. Shadow made sure of it. Shadow lay down beside the grave, peacefully and contentedly. His mission was complete. Clara was avenged properly. But Shadow's work wasn't finished yet in this life. Crime still existed. Killers still walked free in other towns. And Shadow had found his purpose now clearly. He was a lawman's dog, a hunter of killers, a seeker of justice. Frank sat beside Shadow in the grass quietly together. "You know something?" Frank said while looking at Shadow. "Clara would be proud of you." Shadow's tail thumped against the ground in response softly. Frank continued while stroking Shadow's black coat gently and carefully. "You could have run after she died," he said. "Could have hidden, could have done nothing at all. But Shadow had chosen justice instead of fear completely, had chosen action instead of hiding from danger ahead, had chosen to honor Clara's memory by hunting her killer. That makes you the best deputy I've ever had," Frank said. Shadow's ears perked up at the praise given to him. Over the following months, Shadow proved his worth repeatedly to everyone. He tracked down a horse thief who'd evaded capture for years. He found a missing child lost in the wilderness successfully. He stopped a bank robbery by alerting Frank before it happened. Shadow became a legend in Silver Creek and beyond. But to Frank, he was simply Shadow, his partner, his friend, his constant companion through danger and duty both. They patrolled the streets together every night like clockwork. Shadow's presence alone deterred most crime from happening at all. Criminals knew the black dog would hunt them down eventually, would track them anywhere they ran or tried to hide, would never stop until justice was served completely and properly. One night, a stranger rode into Silver Creek under darkness. He wore a gun low and looked dangerous immediately. Shadow's hackles rose instantly, sensing the threat approaching them. Frank noticed Shadow's reaction, and hand moved near his gun. The stranger stopped his horse in front of the jail. "I'm looking for the dog," the stranger said quietly. "The one that caught Victor the killer." Frank stepped forward protectively in front of Shadow immediately. "What do you want with him?" he demanded firmly. The stranger smiled, but it wasn't threatening at all, surprisingly. "I'm a U.S. Marshal from Denver," he explained clearly. "We've heard about this dog's tracking abilities." He showed his badge to Frank, who examined it carefully. "Shadow's not for sale," Frank stated clearly without hesitation. The marshal shook his head at that, misunderstanding quickly. "Don't want to buy him," he clarified. "Want to hire you both together." Frank's eyebrows raised at that unexpected job offer presented. "For what?" he asked, with curiosity building now. The marshal looked at Shadow, sitting alert and ready. "There's an outlaw gang terrorizing 3 territories," he explained seriously. "They killed a family last month. No witnesses." The U.S. Marshal showed Frank a wanted poster for an outlaw gang that was terrorizing several territories. Understanding that this dangerous mission was bigger than Silver Creek, Frank looked at his partner, Shadow. With his intelligent eyes, Shadow seemed to understand everything. Feeling that this was a mission Clara would have approved of, Frank accepted the offer. "We ride at dawn," he said with determination. That night, they made their final preparations. It had now been proven what Shadow was: a lawman, a hero, and a keeper of promises made to the fallen. Clara's death had given rise to an unbreakable partnership between man and dog, one that would become a legend in the Wild West. As the sun rose the next morning, Frank and Shadow rode out toward their new adventure. Frank trusted his partner completely. Shadow had caught Clara's killer, and now he wouldn't stop until this gang was brought to justice. Because Shadow never forgot and never gave up. The witness that evil men feared most, a lawman with 4 legs, sharp teeth, and a memory that lasted forever, had found his true calling.